This Brigham Young University Idaho devotional address by Curtis Castillow, faculty member in the BYU Idaho Department of Religious Education, was given October 4th, 2016.
Over the years, I've enjoyed reading marquee signs outside Christian churches. Sometimes they post messages that are fun or insightful. For example, during a particularly snowy winter, one pastor wrote, "Whoever keeps praying for snow, we're impressed. Now pray for world peace." Another one, "Honk if you love Jesus, text while driving if you want to meet him." Another message was, "I was addicted to the hokey pokey thing, but I turned myself around." That's my favorite one. Some messages read as if God wrote them. For example, "Keep using my name in vain, I'll make rush hour longer." Or, "What part of thou shalt not didn't you understand?" One sign said, "Don't make me come down there." If you and your roommates had a marquee sign outside your door, what would God say to you? I know one thing he has said to me, or I have sensed he's tried to say to me over and over again, is simply this: you know what you want. I know what you need. Elder Richard G. Scott observed that when we ask God in prayer for things we want, it does not assure that we will get what we want. It does guarantee that if worthy, we will get what we need. Brothers and sisters, I know that's true. Years ago, while taking the sacrament with my wife and kids, I had lamented that day about my younger years. My mother, sisters, and I experienced some severe trials in our home because of an addiction my father had to alcohol. There were other trials that came simply because we didn't have the gospel. Now, those trials would affect us for years, but that particular day during the sacrament, I admit I felt sorry for myself. I wished and wanted that life had been different as a kid. In my heart, I cried to God, "Why did you give us what was good? Why didn't you give us what was good? Why did it have to be so bad?" Now, I didn't doubt in God's love for me as his plan of salvation, the big macro plan. I did doubt, however, in the micro plan, the small plan that he tailored for me. You ever feel that way? If you're like me, you know it's true what Elder Neal A. Maxwell said, that having faith in the Father's macro plan of salvation includes making allowance for his micro plans as well. However, sometimes you, or at least I, need a reminder that God knoweth all things, the Lord said, and possesses a perfect understanding of my life, my wants, my needs, and my desires. As I partook of sacrament and thought, why didn't you give us what was good? Why did it have to be so bad, so hard? I felt something. If I could put into words what I felt God was trying to say to me, it was simply this: my son, you want what's good. I want what's best. And what I gave you was the best. That was part of your plan, he seemed to be saying to me, to give you experience and to be for your good. One reason I think we sometimes struggle, at least I do, to trust that all things work together for good to them that love God is because we can't see the end from the beginning. We can only see the here and the now. God, however, sees past, present, and future all at once. In fact, he told Moses, he said, quote, "All things are present with me, for I know them all." We are looked upon by God as though we were in eternity, Joseph Smith said. Thus, what may look bad in the present may become something good in the future. For example, so in this image, you can see this young man push the other young man. What you can't see is if he pushes to hurt or to help. Now I want you to look at the expression on their faces and their body language. What do you think? Does he want to hurt or help? Now let me show you the whole picture. Now what do you think? It's a good thing, right? Rather than pushing him to hurt, he's pushing him to help him get past the oncoming car. And one of my students, years ago I was teaching this, I showed this picture, and one of my students in seminary said, "Brother Castillow, I think it's a bad thing." And I said, "Why?" "Look, his hand went right through his body." I thought, whoa, you're right. I said, "Actually, it's a bad thing. They both died." And I said, "No, just kidding. Just kidding. Don't say that, Brother Castillow." I'm kidding. Here's the lesson. To know this was a good thing, you had to see the whole picture, not just part. Now, if you take a snapshot of the life of Joseph, who was sold into Egypt, now just look at the younger years. It looks bad, especially when you consider he was in bondage for about 13 years. But when we pan across Joseph's whole life, we see that God wasn't punishing Joseph. He was preparing Joseph and preparing him for something better. In Genesis 37, we learn that Joseph traveled to Dothan, the place where his brothers throw him into a cistern and sold him to the Midianites. Now, when you read that part in Genesis 37, from the time he gets to Dothan till he's carried away to Egypt, God seems to be missing. Timothy Keller observes, there is no mention of God anywhere here. God never speaks. God seems to be utterly, absolutely, completely absent. Yet, he must have been managing down to the minute detail, all the awful, all the terrible things, all the things that seem to make no sense. In other words, from the outside looking in, Joseph's microplan seemed like a miserable plan at best. Timothy Keller also observed that when Joseph's brothers threw him into the pit, they stripped him of his coat. Now, the Hebrew word for a stripped is pashat, and it's a term used for when they skinned animals. Moses' word choice seems to suggest that the act was violent in nature. When Moses said they took him and cast him, the Hebrew word for cast was shalach. And it connotes the idea of throwing something away. And if that discarded item is alive, then it infers throwing it to its death. In fact, it's the same word used in Exodus 1:22 when the Pharaoh commanded the Egyptians to take every son that is born and cast, shalach, them into the river. Years later, as Joseph's brothers reflect on that day they threw their brother in the cistern, they give us some insight into what it felt like for Joseph. They said this, "Did we not see the anguish of his soul when he besought us and we would not hear?" Again, during that moment in the pit, God seems aloof. Arresingly, hundreds of years later, in the same spot, Dothan, Elisha cries to the Lord for help because he's surrounded by the Syrian army, and in an instant, the mountainside blazes with a host of angels, horses, and chariots from heaven. You know the story. And then Elisha exclaims, "They that be with us are more than they that be with him." Elisha cries from Dothan, angels deliver him. Joseph cries from Dothan, he's flung into a pit. God's seeming silence, however, is neither evidence of his absence nor of his lack of care. God cared as much for Joseph by hiding his glory and power just as much as he cared for Elisha by displaying it. Yeah, I'm sure there are moments when Joseph just thought, "Lord, that's a really strange way to show you care." Knowing Joseph actually probably never did say that. He's like, "I'm so blessed." He was amazing. Perhaps he thought, though, "God, I just want to go home and be a shepherd." But God wanted Joseph to be more than a shepherd. He wanted him to be a viceroy, a ruler over Egypt. But even more than a shepherd or a viceroy, he wanted him to be a savior. Joseph later would tell his brothers, remember he saved them from the famine? And he said, "God sent me before you to preserve you and to save you." It was not you that sent me hither, but God. Ye thought evil against me, but God meant it unto good. Not only did God turn his brother's evil into Joseph's good, but he was also with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man. According to the scriptures, it said, and Joseph found grace in his sight, and God showed him mercy and gave him favor in Potiphar's home. Now here's the lesson. Even during the crucible of our lives, we can trust that God is aware of us. He's with us, and he will bless us. For God does nothing by chance, said President Spencer W. Kimball, but always by design. As a loving father, it's said that the very hairs of your head are all numbered. Is it not to teach us that nothing, not the smallest things imaginable, happen to us by chance? But if the smallest things we can conceive are declared to be under the divine direction, then certainly the greatest things of life, such as the manner of our coming into the world, our parents, the time, and other circumstances of our birth and condition, are all according to the eternal purposes, direction, and appointment of divine providence. I know this is true. When I attended college like you, I was having one of those bad hair weeks. It was a Lemony Snicket series of unfortunate events moment in my life. Not as bad as Joseph's. The events weren't major problems or setbacks, but they seemed major at the time. While attending BYU Provo, I worked at the BYU Student Association, BYUSA it was called, and applied to be a vice president. But the selection committee chose someone else. I walked home from campus, I was discouraged, but I thought, that's okay. I applied to be an EFY counselor. As I walked in the door to my apartment, I saw on the kitchen table a letter from the EFY office. My roommates were so kind to lay it there, they knew I was expecting it. I tore it open with eagerness. My heart pounded with excitement. I couldn't wait to read where it said I was hired. And then I got to the part that said, sorry. I was declined. Now, this was the same time period, I believe within a week, that I called a girl named Myra Maines to set up a blind date. Now, I got her phone number from the girl I home taught. Now, the girl I home taught asked me what I perceived as the perfect girl to marry. And after I described this perfect girl, I still remember what she did. She said, no way. I totally have the girl for you. I was like, really? She then described this friend of hers, and the description almost matched perfectly the description I gave. This was truly a match made in heaven. Wow, I thought, this was my dream girl. It was like, oh. It was like Ariel moment. But what I didn't know was that I was about to be duped, and some of you already know how, I could tell. Well, she gave me the girl's phone number, and I called the next day, and I was surprised, however, when on the other end of the line, I heard Berg Mortuary. Confused, I thought, I'm looking for someone who apparently works there. Is Myra Maines there? Yeah, you guys get it. There was silence on the other end of the line. I didn't get that, what you just did, but I got silence. Excuse me, I said, excuse me, is Myra Maines there? Sir, is this some kind of a joke? No, this is the number I was given. I was careful to dial it correctly. I still remember holding it in my fingers like that. She was silent again, then she chuckled and she said, sir, you don't get it, do you? And you know what? I didn't. I know what you're thinking. He's not the sharpest knife in the drawer, is he? Believe me, no one's more aware of that than me. Sir, she said, think about it. Then she said slowly, this is a mortuary, sir. Is my remains there? Do you get it now? There was silence on my end of the phone. Yeah, I get it. I hung up, embarrassed, a little humbled. Well, this is the week I was having when I came home from BYU and opened that EFY letter. And after I set the letter down, I saw a hand mirror sitting on the table. I could tell by the open package next to it was something my roommate Miglos ordered through the mail. He would order lots of things, and it seemed odd he would order a hand mirror. Intrigued, I picked up the mirror. Remember, I feel like I'm at the bottom of the food chain. No sooner than I caught my reflection in the mirror, it started laughing at me. Seriously, it was one of those gag mirrors with a built-in speaker that projects this obnoxious laugh and cackle right about the time you pick it up and see your reflection. Now, some of you think he's embellishing this story. I am serious. This happened. Okay, you watch the video in heaven, okay? Well, my misfortunes that week, my defeats, I know they pale in comparison to Joseph's. But that's the part of why I'm sharing them, because I tried to describe the everyday garden variety type of week that you've no doubt experienced too with your roommates. Now, they probably haven't thrown you into a cistern like Joseph. Might have thrown you in the snow, maybe tonight. But you do experience misfortunes, mishaps. I suspect none of you have fallen for the My Remains gag, but I suspect many of you have fallen in love only to have it end. You've had health issues, family problems, financial difficulties, drop majors, change majors, and major problems of every kind. You've been turned down, turned out, and turned away. You didn't get what you wanted. I promise, though, with God, you will get what you need. And it may just be that what God knew you needed was something in the end you wanted. I wasn't happy that God gave me what I apparently needed that week. And in the end, though, I discovered that something I needed was actually something years later I wanted. When those doors I mentioned closed to my life, other doors opened. One door that opened led me to become a seminary teacher for the church education system. It was an occupation that was ideal for my personality and family, and actually it would open a door to get to work with EFY. And eventually it would bring me here to BYU, Idaho, 3 years ago to teach in the religion department, a move that I consider the greatest blessing of my career. And what if my remains was a real girl? What if I had married her? What if she was really alive? She wouldn't have been Heather Sampson, the woman I did marry, the woman I love. And I wouldn't have my children, Kurt and Carly, and the twins, Brigham and Bryn, and Cutler. Now, and let me just say, I wouldn't have my mom, Barbara, who taught me who God is. And I wouldn't have had my father. After all that's been said, I think it's essential to remember that the Lord doesn't give or allow things that hurt you in eternity. He gives you things that will help. We need to be careful that what he gives to help we don't interpret as something that hurts. Ask and it shall be given you. Seek and you shall find. Knock and it shall be opened unto you. What man is there of you whom if his son ask bread, will he give him a stone? Or if he ask a fish, will he give him a serpent? If a son asks for bread or fish, something he needs, would a loving parent give him a stone or a serpent? No. A stone is worthless. A serpent is harmful. God doesn't give things that are worthless or harmful. He gives things that are needful and helpful. So ask and seek and knock. But be careful, though, that when God offers you bread or fish, you don't view it as a stone or serpent. S. Michael Wilcox observed that sometimes it's easy to judge the bread that God gives as stones or serpents. I say, Lord, I want bread. I want what's good. And the Lord responds, do you want me to give you what you want or what you need? George MacDonald said, man finds it hard to get what he wants because he does not want the best. God finds it hard to give because he would give the best and man will not take it. In the Ensign, recently there was a story about a young man named Christopher. It's one of my favorite stories. He was so grateful he didn't turn bread into stone, into serpents. When he tore open his mission call, his heart dropped. When he read the line, Michigan Lansing Mission. He had waited his whole life for that moment. He took German and Spanish in high school because he had dreamed of a foreign mission, walking the cobble streets of Europe, hiking the remote mountains, pueblos in America, South America. But what he got was Michigan. Nothing wrong with Michigan, to those of you who are from there. That's not what he wanted. You ever have something like that happen to you? You figuratively wanted Argentina, but what you got was Michigan. For some of you, maybe it was Rexburg. And you're like, what? It's going to snow. Christopher could have regarded that call as a stone, a serpent, but instead he saw it as bread. He accepted the call the Lord gave and served an honorable mission. And more than 20 years, now this is the important part, more than 20 years later, a friend invites him to take a DNA test. I had been adopted and had no idea of my biological ancestry, said Christopher. He was kind of curious about his biological parents. He said he was content with his life and he had a family he loved. Then the results came back. He said it was a close family match. It predicted with 99% that they had found a close family member. Before I knew what was happening, said Christopher, my wife composed an email to send to this close family match. Within minutes, an email came back. How old was I? Where was I born? It turned out that the close family match was my half-brother. The person sending the emails was my birth mother. She wanted me to call her. The next morning, I dialed her number, and as we talked, she told me the story of my birth. Before Christopher hung up, he asked about his biological father. His mother thought Christopher's father was from Lansing, Michigan. Within minutes after the phone call, Christopher found his father on the internet. He lived in an area close to where Christopher served his mission. Now, digging further, his dad and his sister his dad, what he found, had a sister living right by him in the same area, Lansing, Michigan. He emailed his father, and his father replied that his sister was LDS, and she and her husband were coming to Utah and hoped they could visit Christopher. Here's what he said. As they walked in my door, I felt an instant familiarity. Suddenly, another light turned on. The man's hair had gone from black to silver, but suddenly I saw in front of me the ward mission leader from Grand Rapids Ward. I had worked with him during a large part of my mission. For months, I had been in his home weekly. I had played with his children, my cousins. I had been with my aunt, excuse me, and my uncle and hadn't known it. In light of my discovery, I knew why I had been called to serve a mission in Michigan. My biological family was spread all over Michigan in places where I was called to serve. I knew now this was truly a call by inspiration specifically for me. In the same way that a mission call was part of Christopher's micro plan, and Joseph's slavery was part of his plan, our experiences are part of our plans. Now, I admit why God tailors some experiences for us may not be clear now. Thus, we may have to be patient because, as the Lord said, quote, all things must come to pass in their time, even understanding. However, with the Savior's help, we can say not only, thy will be done, Lord, but patiently also, thy timing be done, Lord, said Neal A. Maxwell. Now, I know that in my mind. Sometimes I forget it in my heart, especially when I don't get what I want or what I think I need. And in those moments, I need to remember what the Garden of Eden taught Eve. God said, of every tree of the garden thou mayest freely eat, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil thou shalt not eat of it. I suspect there was an infinite amount of trees in that garden. And since it was before the fall, I suspect most of the trees and plant life were edible. You probably could have nibbled the bark and gobbled the leaves. Now, with my childlike mind, I kind of imagine a Willy Wonka chocolate factory Garden of Eden, complete with edible mushrooms, gummy bear fruit, and rivers of chocolate. Okay, I know my imagination is not doctrinally correct. I'm sorry, brethren in the religion department. I know that. But I really think there were a lot of things to eat. That being the case, it's interesting to note what Satan tempted Eve to focus upon. All the things she could have, or the one thing she couldn't. Right, the thing she couldn't have. And Satan does the same thing to us. He did the same thing to me. As I partook of that sacrament with my wife and kids years ago, rather than look at all the good things in my childhood that I did have, I looked upon the good things I didn't have. I overlooked all the goodness and the love and the sacrifice my mom Barbara gave me. How she taught me to believe in God. And that belief would sprout into a desire to know God when I was about your age. By focusing on the bad, I overlooked the good in my dad, Curtis. My dad was good with kids. He was funny. He was a hard worker. And you know what? He loved me. And I also overlooked my wonderful sisters, Anna and Beth. They helped me grow up, and they put up with their brother, who was a big stinker. To focus on the one figurative tree, the seeming bad in our lives, whether past or present, blinds us from all that's good and all that God has given and all that God still gives. In conclusion, in light of all that I've said, permit me to share just two more church marquee signs. One said, God, help me to be the person my dog thinks I am. Only the dog lovers here are going to get that one. So. And the other sign is, God is the potter, not Harry. God will help you to be not only what your dog thinks you are, but what God knows you will be, because He's the potter. But remember, though we know what we want, Jesus said in His prayer, your Father knoweth what things ye have need before you even ask Him. So if something is shoving you on life's highway, maybe it's shoving you away from harm or toward what's good or what's better or what's best. Remember, God cared as much for Joseph by hiding His power just as much as He cared for Elisha by displaying it. And even in the seeming absence, He's aware of us. We can still prosper like Joseph, receive grace, mercy, and favor. So go forward, ask, seek, knock in prayer. But remember, you may not get what you want. But if you stay faithful, you will get what you need. And perhaps find in the end, like me, what you needed, you would later discover it was also what you wanted. I bear my testimony to you that God lives. Jesus is the Christ. He is my Redeemer. He has managed my life so much better than I could have ever done so on my own. I love him. And I want you to know he loves you. He's there for you. He's guiding you. In the sacred name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
For more information about this program, please visit the BYU Idaho website at www.byui.edu/devotionals and speeches.